If you guys haven't seen this yet, David Lade and Lex Little put out some recent sparring footage on arm wrestling. These guys normally are not arm wrestlers. They're doing some sort of bodybuilding or powerlifting kind of training normally. But lately they've been putting out a lot more of this kind of stuff, and they seem to have caught the arm wrestling bug and really be enjoying this. Obviously, they're a little bit newer to the sport, and I thought it would just be fun to analyze their sparring footage and look at some of the technique that they're showing. Now, right off the bat, there's several things that I'm noticing. I'm noticing Lex Little's shoulder commitment seems to be significantly better. I'm also noticing this little pockets in between his pinky finger and David's arm, or David's wrist. So this is telling me that Lex is doing a good job of getting a very deep grip. He's getting a lot of depth, so that means that David's arm or his hand is going to be closer to the joints of Lex's wrist, which means he's just going to have more leverage to bend his wrist. And he's going to have more of an ability to essentially punch his hand over the top of David's arm and bend his wrist using his entire body instead of simply trying to hold on and do a wrist curl versus David's entire top roll chain. This is a very effective way to get your wrist bent. Looks like Lex's arm is shorter, so he's going to be the guy generally having to hold on a little bit more so, or the burden of reversing that is going to be on him. And this is what we see in this first round. Even though Lex is moving back on the pad, he's still able to kind of roll over the top of David. David kind of lets this go in the first one. We're going to look at a second bull here. Still, Lex is doing a really good job of getting his knuckles high and creating this gap, creating space. So when David top rolls, he's not going to be immediately contacting or putting pressure into the fingertips of Lex Little, but rather he's going to be top rolling into empty space for at least maybe about an inch or a little bit less than an inch of space. His top roll isn't going to be doing all that much until this moment right here where it actually catches. And then he's actually going to be cracking Lex's wrist back. So this is much better from David. We see him actually allowing this kind of sticking point to occur here on his elbow flexor. And now instead of letting something go, he's saying you're going to have to actually rip through this angle if he wants to get this match onto the B side of the table. And this results in Lex Little's wrist going back. David is maintaining a high knuckle position here. So this is much, much better. It looks like he has a better grip to start. And he was kind of allowed to initiate. And you can see there the arm length. You can see how much higher David's wrist is, even though Lex is all the way on his tricep. It looks to me like that wrist knuckle is a little bit taller. So let's look at a couple more pulls here. On this one, we see once again that there's this gap created, and here we're going to see Lex use supination to his advantage. So he actually initiates going more outside, but then we see him coming back in, and once the match is supinated, he has a much better connection to David's arm. It looks like Lex is significantly stronger inside. His arm power is much, much better. And one of the kind of golden rules of arm wrestling that we hear Devin Larratt talking about all the time is do not take what's being given to you. So it may seem like if Lex is supinated that David has now gained his cup, but really what has happened is this is going to advantage Lex more so than David because of this connection through the kind of pinky pad region of Lex's hand. He's going to be able to push into David's arm. So now he doesn't have to get his wrist fully bent in order to access his side pressure, but rather he can access his side pressure through supination. And you can see the kind of dynamic change here. As soon as this happens, there's a significant power gap, and David is not really going to be able to do anything. He tries to come up, but there's just no way he's going to be able to do anything once the match is inside. So Lex allows him to regrip and get significantly higher on the hand, and this kind of changes things. I think this ends up going into a flop press, but what we can see is that if this match goes inside, this is going to significantly favor Lex. And we're going to see a really interesting counter to this, and this is what I would like to see. I think this is pretty impressive that David is doing this. This is generally a little bit more of an advanced technique, and probably you would want to do this off the go to make it more effective. But once again, we see a lot of supination, a lot of cupping, and this match is going to end up being turned pretty much into a hook. You can see that David's elbow flexor, his up pressure is kind of right on the verge already. So as soon as Lex is able to get a little bit of connection through his supination, now he has a lot of ability to drive down and to crush David's pronator and to go right over the top of him. He has access to his side pressure. So in this moment, what happens It's a little bit hard to tell if this is something intentionally initiated by David or if LEXX switched to a top roll. But either way, the hand ends up rolling out, and what you'll see is that when this supination goes away, so when David's wrist kicks back and now the supination is gone, this actually opens up the top roll lane. And now David has the ability to escape out the back. Now it looks like he just barely dips below the pin pad here. So this was a little bit late on the execution side of things. But I think that this moment right here, this move, actually looked very Devin Larratt-esque. And you can see how changing this angle makes it significantly harder for LEXX to access his side pressure, because once the supination is gone, he has no connection to that. Once the wrist is kicked back, now his knuckles are essentially aiming directly this way instead of aiming up or aiming toward his own pin pad. Now, if I were able to give any kind of constructive criticism, one thing that I would love to see from David is in the setup trying to deny this little gap that's occurring right between the pinky pad and his hand, making sure that he is not allowing his opponent to get a really deep grip or to push past him, but creating separation in between the thumbs of each opponent and eliminating this gap, and essentially just making sure that the moment he starts to pull, he's always pulling into his opponent's wrist. He's always pulling into his opponent's fingertips. He's not pulling into empty space, but he is immediately pulling in a way that's going to crack his opponent's wrist back. Another thing he could potentially do is simply increase the isometric strength of his elbow flexor. Sometimes people are even very strong on curling exercises, and it just doesn't necessarily directly translate immediately to the table. You're going to have a really strong base in terms of your elbow flexor, but sometimes you just need to do a little bit more isometric training in order to get that kind of locking effect to translate more so to the table, because I am noticing David's elbow flexor open up quite a bit throughout this match. Oftentimes he's in an angle that is well past 90 degrees. And I think because of his build, he definitely could get a lot closer, and that would probably be more effective for him if he could keep that angle a little bit tighter. As for LEXX, I think it would be really interesting to see him try to bring his elbow and his shoulder a little bit more forward and actually shoot his hand forward to push upon the initiation of the match instead of kind of dragging back like we normally see him doing here. He seems to be an arm wrestler that really likes to get his wrist bent, and if he was trying to prioritize getting his wrist bent above everything else, I would think that pushing forward and kind of pushing around his opponent's pronator would be significantly more effective in that regard. And then that would give him access to his power, because it looks like he's really, really strong once he just gets his wrist bent. Once he gets the match inside, it looks like he's really difficult to deal with. But of course, these guys are very new to the sport. They're just trying things out. They're trying different techniques, seeing how they feel. And I would encourage them to continue doing that, to try every single different lane. And really, there's no need to commit so early to a single lane. I think that they can do everything. They can top roll, they can press, they can hook, they can do whatever they want. And then potentially, at some point far down the road in their career, if they notice that one move seems to be kind of climbing above the rest, maybe they would put an emphasis on that move. But for now, I love what they're doing. I love that they're falling in love with arm wrestling, at least seemingly. So I hope that we continue to see both David and LEXX arm wrestling. And who knows, maybe they could even be a good matchup for each other at some point in the future. All right, hopefully this was somewhat helpful, and I'll talk to you guys later.